Hey everyone, this is Ellie Mae with Silhouette Secrets Plus, and today I have a tutorial on how you can create templates in your Silhouette Studio software that you could use over and over again. This is a great tool to have in your toolbox. If you are using the same blanks over and over again, you can open your template file and then just use that to make your new projects. So I'm going to be demonstrating with a Sublimation air freshener, and we're going to use that shape. So it's going to be a very basic shape, but you can use this for any sort of blank that you're using, and we're going to go step by step. Check out the links in the description below. I have a full written tutorial as well as this video that I'm putting out, and there's more information in that description. So let's take a look at how we can get started. The first thing you're going to do is you are going to measure your blank. This is going to give you an idea of the size that you would need to create your template shape at. So after you have measured your blank, we're going to come over here into the Silhouette Studio software, and I am going to be using my Sublimation printer. So I'm going to be printing on a sheet of letter size paper. So I have simply chosen letter size in my media size. Media size equals the page size of what you are going to be working with. So I am using a letter size sheet of paper, so I know exactly how much space I have. Since I'm going to be printing, I am also going to turn on my show print border, and this is going to place a gray rectangle around my page that tells me where my print margins are. So anything outside of this gray box is not going to print. So that gives me an idea of where I can set my shapes for my template file. And in this case, I simply have a rounded rectangle. So I could use a square rectangle. That's not going to be a problem with this sublimation blank. If you can, for your blank, when you're doing sublimation, it's always a good idea to make your template or make your design larger than the actual blank. This will help you when you are lining it up, and you don't have to get it perfectly centered on that blank when you are doing that. And I have photos on the blog of that as well. In this video, it's just going to show the process in Silhouette Studio. So I'm going to use this rounded rectangle, and I'm going to come over here and I'm going to hold my shift key down. That is going to draw a perfect size rectangle, meaning that the height and the width are the exact same measurements. So I'm just going to draw it out. It doesn't matter what the size is. And then I can simply change it to the size that I need. So I can use the scale tools in the top quick access toolbar, your width and your height. If you do not see your width and your height here, it could be condensed due to your screen size. And so you could simply choose this little directional arrow and you should see that width and the height. It can also be found on the right side under your transform panel. And the second tab, you'll recognize that diagonal arrow. And when we open that, you also have your width and your height. This little lock here determines whether the aspect ratio is locked, meaning that when it's locked, if I change one of these, it's going to change the next one proportionally. If it's unlocked, I can change simply one at a time. And then we're going to change the dimensions to what we need. And again, like I said, in this case, I'm making it a little bit bigger, so 3.35 than the actual blank because I'm doing sublimation. But for any blank that you're using, you could enter those measurements that you need. And then you can see these little red dots here. Because it's a rounded rectangle, I can adjust these. I really don't need to in this case, but I want to show you how. So if I simply click on one, I can adjust one at a time. I'm going to hit undo so it goes back to the current location. If I press my shift key and I move them, it's going to adjust them proportionally at the same time. So you have those options. In order to get those to disappear, you can simply right click on it and choose convert to path, and it's going to make this rounded rectangle no longer editable by those edit points. So you can really customize this shape, and that's what happens if you use the flexi shapes as well. On this side, you're going to see those points that you can modify a design with as well. Each shape is going to vary in what points it has. So once we have our rounded rectangle that we're using, I'm simply going to copy and paste for the rest of my design, depending on how many I want on a sheet of paper. In this case, I'm going to fit 6 on the sheet of paper. So my favorite way to make a copy, there's like 10 different ways in Silhouette Studio. My favorite way is hold the Alt key down. When I hold the Alt key down, you're going to see my cursor change when I'm over top of that cut line to a plus sign. And then I can simply drag a copy away. And once I have that copy made, I'm going to select both of these, and I just want to center these together. And this is a personal preference. You really don't have to, especially for sublimation, because I'm just going to cut these apart anyhow. And then what I can do is I'm going to group these together. So you can right click and choose group, or you can Control G for group as the shortcut. And then I'm just going to, again, copy and paste. And the reason I grouped those will be apparent here in just a second. With all of those grouped, and I have all of my copies made, I can simply select those 3 groupings, and I can then use my align tools, and it's going to align those 3 rows together by its middle center. And then I want to use this space vertical, and I'm going to space those out exactly vertically. And again, aligning is completely personal preference. If you want it to be lined up perfectly, it doesn't have to be in this case. You can also find these align tools again under the transform panel on the right side, and the first icon is your align options, align center, and at the bottom is your spacing. And I use these tools all the time. And that is our template. So the next step you want to do is file and save. And I'm going to save this as a separate copy, air freshener, just because it's my project. So I name it as that blank that I'm using, air freshener blank template. And there I have my template file. Now I'm going to take it one step further in this photo and show you a couple ways that you can fill your template in. So for this particular project, I am filling with some sort of pattern because I'm going to be printing it with my Sublimation printer. Now, Sublimation, unless you're doing something a little bit more advanced, you do not need to set it up as a print and cut because Sublimation is simply an ink transfer. It doesn't have to have exact cuts around the design. Again, unless you're using an advanced technique, which is beyond this video. So you simply print your Sublimation print through a Sublimation printer, and I'll have links in the description below with a few more things on Sublimation. And then you press it. That's it. It's really not that difficult. It's very easy, but you do need specialized equipment if you're using Sublimation printers and ink. So you're also printing with Sublimation paper as well. So it is a really neat thing, and I'm having fun playing with it and making GIFs with it. So I wanted to share this as I was doing that. So I'm going to show you 3 different ways that you could fill a pattern. The first way, I am first going to ungroup these so that I can work with them individually. And my air fresheners are double-sided. So you could do 2 different patterns on either side of these air fresheners or not. So this row here is going to be 1 air freshener because it is a double-sided item. So in my demonstration, I use the same pattern on both sides. So you could either fill each one separately, or I'll show you a trick. So I'm going to select one of them. And then the first way I'm going to show you is through the fill color panel. And you have the 3rd tab over is your pattern fill. And then this is going to take, when I click on it, it's going to take a little bit of time depending on how many patterns you have in your library. So pattern fill is a really cool thing, and you'll see these little thumbnail images show up over here. When you move your mouse over top of it and let it stay there for a second, you're going to see the name of your pattern show up. So I'm simply, with my object selected on my screen, I'm going to click on this pattern, and it fills that pattern into that shape. Now, down below, or some people may have advanced options that they need to click to open that further. You also have the ability where you can angle your pattern. So I can change the way this shows. or I can pan the pattern, so I can change that as well. So you can really play and make this unique to what you want to do. Now, one thing I will notice here or point out to you is when I change this angle, if you can see this, you can see that this pattern has a line in it. So patterns are created at a certain size. And when you do this, this is called tiling. If I undo, if I were to pan this pattern the way it is right now, you're going to see that come through. So the pattern is tiling itself. Each square of that pattern adds additional squares around it. And sometimes those are more noticeable than others. So in this case, I could reset this to 0. And since I've moved that pattern, I can move it back, or I can simply press undo. But you'll notice here, if I were to move this pattern over, it has that same pattern next to it. And so that it creates that tiling effect. Now I'm simply going to come up here and hit undo a few times and go back to my original. So here's my original. Now I could do the same thing over here, but in this pattern case, I added some text to it. So I'm going to come over here to my library. I'm going to type in the number 35309, and it's going to bring up the design that I used. So I'm going to double click on this design. It's going to open it large, and I just move it off my design space to work with it. So I can scale that down to what I would like. And then I'm going to come up here and I'm going to use the fill color panel. Now in this case, you can change it to whatever you want. I'm going to choose a color that's also in my design. So I kind of want a darker blue. This shows as a purple on my screen. And then I can change the line color. I don't want that red to show. And what I actually want to do here is I'm going to come up here, and this is the color it currently shows, but you can change that. If I come back over here on my fill color panel and open up the full panel, at the bottom I have some additional color options. So I can change this to a bit darker color than what I really, the eyedropper picked. So then I simply can move this over top, and I'm going to select both of those and center. Now, since I have made this design very specific in that I have a word centered in the middle of the design, it's not simply just a pattern, I want the second one to match exactly. So in this case, since I've changed my template file, I want to make sure to save this as a new project. So first I'm going to come up here to File, Save As, Save to Hard Drive, and I'm going to put this in as my air freshener project. And now I still have my template file, the original template file saved, but now I have this file saved for my current project. And you just want to make sure that you save from your template file before you hit save in general. You can always go back and just delete what's in your template spaces if you forget. It's not hard to do. In this case, I want it to match exactly. So I'm going to delete this side, select this, and I'm going to hold my Alt key down and make a copy. So then everything is the same for both sides. So the second way I want to show you on how you can do a pattern fill is you're going to click on this little icon in the bottom left corner of your screen. And then you can move these little windows out too, depending on how it pops open. I'm going to click on my patterns folder. And this is a great way if you want to see bigger thumbnails of your patterns or your designs. You can use this for designing with your library to be able to search. It just makes your screen, like I'll close this one so I can still see my template file. So I'm going to be filling this shape. The key here is any shape that is selected, that's what it's going to fill with that pattern. So you want to make sure the object that you want is selected and not something else. So I'm going to come over and I'm going to choose, it's a tropical leopard print. I'm looking at my notes so I get this right. And I'm simply going to click on that and it's going to fill it in that space. Now, I could do the same thing here because I did not add text. I played around with it for a really long time. Designing things takes me a lot of time. Even when I'm writing the blog tutorials and things, I go back and forth all the time, choosing text styles, choosing different things. It's all really a matter of personal preference. And eventually I just gave up and decided I was just going to print this and get the project done without anything in the middle because I could not settle on anything. So since I didn't change anything here, I can simply just fill that with the pattern. And then the third way I want to share with you is I'm going to close this show hide library. And just so you can see this on the screen a little bit better, I'm just going to move my screen over. So my design mat is over here, and I am going to open up my Windows folder where a photo is saved. So I'm going to click on this folder, and it's going to open on top of my Silhouette Studio software. I can make my little folder window a little bit smaller so we can see this. And then I'm going to make sure, and it's going to disappear again here in just a second, but same thing will happen to you. I need to select my object first. That's the very first thing to do. And then I can open this folder up again. So I have this photo that we took when we were in Washington, D.C. back in 2017. And I can simply grab this photo from my Windows folder, a Mac, it should work the same. And I'm going to drag and drop it into that template file. So I'm going to drag it, drop it in the file. If I drop it outside, here I'll show you what happens. It's going to drop it onto my design mat, and since it's a photo, it is a large file. So if I were to let this go, it's going to drop it there. If I were to zoom out, you can see this is a large file because it's a photo. You also may notice that your computer starts to run a little bit harder because photo files are large. And the original size this comes in at is going to be low resolution. It's going to tell me that. I don't need it at that size, so I'm simply going to press undo because it's my best friend and I undid too much, so then I can redo. So I simply just dragged it from my computer folder and dropped it into the shape. While you could add your photos into your patterns folder in your Silhouette Studio library, I do not recommend doing so because that eats up very precious library storage. Because this photo is large, so if I come over here, my photo dimensions are 3,000 plus pixels. It's large, so it's going to be a large file that goes into my Silhouette library. That's going to eat up my library storage space. Anything that's in your patterns folder will do that. So any patterns you add that are outside of the Silhouette Design Store take up storage space. And photos, which are JPEG or PNG files, are large or can be very large files. So that's something to keep in mind when you are working with photos in your Silhouette Studio software. You may hear your computer processing a little bit harder because those are large files and they contain a lot of data. If you are experiencing issues with your computer when you're working with large graphics like I have on my screen, I would highly recommend that you close as many tabs in your Silhouette Studio software as possible. And if you have other programs open on your computer, close those as well because that eats up data processing on your computer. So doing all those things can help and save your file often. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to save my file. So I'm just going to click the little save icon. And then what I'm going to do is, in this case, I added some text to it. So I'm going to come over here to my text tool, and I'm simply going to type out Washington, D.C., 2017. And it doesn't fit on all one line with the default text. That's not a problem. I'm going to grab this little green box here, and I can move that out to the right. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to click off of it to deselect it and click back on it one time so it's able to be scaled. And I'm simply grabbing the corner bounding box and I'm scaling that down a little bit. It's still too big for what I want it, but it will be easier for you to see on the screen. So I'm simply going to come up here to my fill color panel in my quick access toolbar or you could open the fill color panel again over here and use it, either one, whichever works the best for you and your project. And I'm going to fill that with black, and then I'm going to change the line color to transparent. And in this case, I believe I actually filled it with white so it would show up on my photo. So I can simply come back up here, going to change that to white, and this is still a transparent. And then what I'm going to do is come over to my text style panel on the right hand side, and I use one of my favorite fonts. I don't know why, I just like it, or I keep going back to it, is a Sharpie pen, and I like the Sharpie Bold. So I'm going to come over here, and it activated my crosshairs because my computer was thinking. So I'm going to open that text style panel up again. It just happens sometimes. The letter H on your keyboard activates those crosshairs. So if you ever see those, if I do this again on purpose, if I click on here, H activates those crosshairs, which will go around your cursor. So if I simply press H again, it turns them off. And that's exactly what happened. And I'm just going to leave it in the video because it happens to all users. So here in my text style, I want to select my text first, and then I'm going to come over here, and I know exactly which file I want. So I have the Sharpie pen, and it's one of my favorites, and there's a link in the description below for that. So I have two different styles. I have a couple actually. Sharpie Thin and Sharpie Pen, and I really like that Sharpie Pen. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to keep this over here as a copy, because once I change things, then it's no longer editable text. So I'm going to hold my Alt key down and drag a copy away. And you see this over here, this is excess space because in my previous font style, it needed more space than in this current font style. So since I've made a copy, I can simply right click and choose convert to path, and it's going to make that selection box much more accurate. Now, it's no longer editable text. So you can see here when I move my mouse over top of the top here, it is still editable text. It will tell me the name of the font style I used. If I double click on that, it's also going to show me the name in my text style panel. This one here, the copy I made, once I converted it to path, it is no longer editable text. It's now a vector design. So it's not going to give me those text properties. So now what I can do is I can size this down and move it on top of my photo and decide where I want to place it. And then because of my project, I want to keep in mind that I created my template file a little bit larger than my actual blank. So I want to make sure that I'm using that in my design. So I want to give it a little bit extra room around the edges. And once I have it where I would like, I'm going to select both my photo and my text, and I'm going to use the align tools to align those centered. Then you can align it however you choose to do so. Since I have a very specific design that is going to be centered, then I want to click on this template shape and simply press delete. And I'm going to select this side, the entire shape and the text, hold my Alt key down and make a copy. And then I'm going to save this file. And then I use this to make these Sublimation air fresheners. So here's a photo of those air fresheners, and I simply printed through my Sublimation printer, and then I cut them apart, and then I pressed them. And I learned several tips to doing this. My first ones didn't turn out because my sublimation paper stuck to my blanks. Here's a photo of that. My second round, I did one at a time, and I quickly worked to take that sublimation paper off after it was pressed, and they turned out much better. So here's a photo of that finished project. And I think that my favorite has to be the tie-dyed with Do More of What Makes You Happy. And here's a photo of that one. So I hope those tips have helped to give you some looks into how you can create your own templates in the Silhouette Studio software, and how you can use tools to fill patterns, to add text, and to just utilize the features in the Silhouette Studio software. Check out the links in the description below for the supplies that I did use in this tutorial, and also the link for the written tutorial on the Silhouette Secrets blog. Make sure to like and subscribe and click that bell for notifications of future content on the Silhouette Secrets YouTube channel, and I thank you for joining me. Have a great day.